Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Clive Kabatsnik, and I'm the chair of the American Friends of the Hebrew University, which is a US-based nonprofit organization that raises funds and awareness for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. We work closely with the university's friends around the world, and we welcome all of you who are tuning in from around the globe to this very important and timely webinar. We are very happy to bring these webinars on this topic and many others to audience near and far, especially during these extraordinary and difficult days. And we're deeply grateful for the time our friends and experts in Israel are devoting to us today. I'm honored to introduce today's program featuring two esteemed members of the Hebrew University's Paul Baerwald School of Social Work. I want to talk a little bit before the formal introduction about my personal thoughts about the issue of trauma and mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder treatment in Israel. I came to Israel in 1974, and the issue of mental health and post-trauma healthcare was really not regarded as anything serious in Israel, as well as around the world, but I think Israel was worse. The prisoners who came back from captivity in Egypt and Syria at the time were treated disgracefully by the Israeli establishment. The post Yom Kippur War conflicts in Lebanon 1 and Lebanon 2, the same thing happened. And so it's gratifying and obviously timely that the issue of trauma and stress treatment, etc., has become something that's certainly more in the forefront globally, but particularly in Israel, there's now a new appreciation of how important this is. And obviously, with the horrendous events of October 7th and this ensuing war, we've essentially have a collective psychological trauma in Israel. The whole country is traumatized. Obviously, the victims of October 7th, the direct victims of October 7th, are the most traumatized. But we have soldiers and reservists who are in Gaza, on the West Bank, in the north, who are also going to suffer from traumatic stress. And the nation as a whole is in great need of general mental healing, because this is a societal traumatic event and one that's going to take us a long time to process and to get over. And in this context, the Hebrew University is extremely fortunate to count among its faculty experts, many in the study of treatment of trauma. And while no one could ever imagine the circumstances in which we find ourselves today, it's with a sense of purpose that the Hebrew University community brings to bear all the knowledge and expertise it can provide to comfort, heal, and find a path forward to the citizens of Israel, and especially the most vulnerable members and those who have really been traumatized by the events of the past 3 months. So I'm going to turn the floor over and give an introduction of a bio, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our We Are One emergency fund that we've established at the Hebrew University globally to meet the needs, the emergency needs that have been created post October 7th. Donations to the campaign are being used to meet the immediate needs of students and members of the Hebrew University community, including counseling and mental health services, increased campus security, and scholarships and financial support for returning soldiers. In addition, contributions to the We Are One campaign will also fund programs designed to rebuild a multicultural, tolerant, and pluralistic community that has defined the Hebrew University since its inception. This is even more important post October 7th. And these efforts are paramount to a successful return to campus life, which thankfully has gone without incident since the university's opening of the academic year on December 31st. Members of the Hebrew University community who are not serving on the front lines are also helping in other ways. Members of the dental faculty have lent expertise to the grim task of identifying victims of the October 7th massacre. Members of the law faculty are providing legal assistance to families of the hostages and to those in need of legal advice as a result of the war. And more recently, I think have been very involved with the tribunal in The Hague, where Israel has been unjustly and falsely accused of genocide against the Palestinian people. Members of the Faculty of Agriculture have been in the field volunteering to work on farms, replacing those who have been lost, who have even been called up for military service. And I'm involved in a project, hopefully that will get funded, where the veterinary school is also taking care of the many dogs that have been lost, abandoned, and also traumatized because of this war and the events post-October 7th. We will share the link for further information in the chat. and we're grateful for all your donations in any amount. Now to today's webinar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the participants in today's discussion, Professor Asher Ben-Arieh and Professor Ofrit Shapira Berman. Dean of the Hebrew University's Paul Baerwald School of Social Work and Social Welfare, Professor Ben-Arieh holds the Haruf Chair for the study of child maltreatment. He has published extensively on children's well-being, with a concentration on the indicators of children's well-being and child maltreatment. He's also the founding editor-in-chief of the Child Indicators Research Journal and the Child Well-being Indicators and Research book series. Currently, Professor Ben-Arieh is one of the principal investigators of the International Study of Children's Well-being Research Project. Professor Shapira Berman is a trained psychoanalyst and an expert in the long-term treatment of complex trauma. She is currently heading the mental health department at First Line Med, a medical and therapeutic organization for the victims of October 7th and their families. In recent months, she's been featured across media outlets, both internationally and in Israel, from broadcast interviews with Katie Couric and CNN to contributions to Time magazine and the Times of Israel. Her expertise has been highly sought and well regarded. So the format is we will be hearing formal presentations for about half an hour. There will be a question and answer session afterwards, and questions are welcome. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A, and we will facilitate the discussion after the presentation. So professors, thank you very much. And
so I think I'm going on first, and I'll share my screen. And I hope everybody could see it. And I will start by saying that I don't think the word happy to be here is the right one. This is one webinar we would be happy to skip and not talk about those issues, but I'm honored to be here and talk in my two capacities. One is as the director of the Haruf Institute, which is associated academically with the Hebrew University, and second is the Dean of the School of Social Work. And I'm going to talk basically about the children and what happened or what's going on and how the school and the Haruf Institute is working with the children who were victims of the October 7. So the beginning point is October 7, and a sudden attack on Israel by the Hamas terrorist organization. And this is a picture by a drawing by one of the kids that was affected for it. And then, surprisingly enough, we were approached by the Ministry of Social Services. I'm saying surprisingly enough because it's one of the very rare instances where somebody from the government acted as a government. And they came to us, I think it was October 10 or 11, and they said, look, there is vast amounts of children specifically who were affected by the October 7 terror massacre and the war that followed it, and we need to be prepared. And we identified 6 groups of children that we were worried about together with them and started working about. The first group, and that was the initial approach from the ministry to us, was children who were kept hostages by the Hamas, children who were kidnapped. We were talking about 30 kids, ages less than a year to 18, who were kidnapped by the Hamas terrorists, and 38 of them came back already. 2 we are still praying and hoping that one day they will come back and that they are alive. The second group, which is a bigger group, by numbers at least, is children who witnessed severe violence and the massacre, children who witnessed the murdering of their parents, and children who witnessed the murdering of other people they knew. The third group are children who lost both of their parents, and we're not saying that they are orphans, yes. Some of them, one of the parents was murdered and the other parent is in captivity. Other children have one parent who might be murdered, is in captivity. The other parent is in Israel, but is still hospitalized and is unable to act as a parent. So we are talking about children who lost both of their parents. And then we are talking about children who lost one parent and or a sibling of their family. And the fifth group is children whose friends and peers were kidnapped or killed. And at the beginning, the Israeli society, and to some degree even today, even the professionals, were not talking enough about this group, about the children that a child that nobody from his family died, or nobody from his family was kidnapped, but his best friend in his classroom, who grew up with him from the age of 0 to 16, was kidnapped or murdered. And the peer groups and the peer relations and we have a school in the regional council of Eshkol that there is not even one class that all the kids are safe and at home. In every class, there is at least one child who was kidnapped or at least one child who was murdered. And then we are talking about the sixth group that is becoming more and more apparent that we need to do something about, and those are children who were evacuated from their homes. And children were evacuated from their home immediately, in the middle of the night, some of them, without any preparation, and they are out of their home for more than 100 years. Not all of them lost their houses physically, but they are not allowed to go back to their houses or to the regular place where they live. So those are the six groups that we were asked by the Ministry of Social Services to start and develop protocols and models on how to help them. I will focus more than others on the child hostages, because I think this is probably the most severe, unknown, uncharted territory of all the things that we've dealt with. Trying to develop guidelines for the care and treatment of returning child hostages was a major issue for us. First of all, luckily for us, and hopefully never in the future, there are not many cases around the world that involve kidnapping of children. Everybody talks about Boko Haram and the girls that were kidnapped in Nigeria, but this is one case that everybody remembers. Not all of them came back. Some of them married their captors or the terrorists who kidnapped them and even became pregnant and came back with their husbands or stayed to live with their husband. And in any case, there's not enough research about it. There is a lot of talks, and it's true that thousands of kids were kidnapped in Ukraine, but almost none of them came back yet. And there's definitely no evidence about how to deal with those who came back. And there is very scarce knowledge about it at large. So what did we do? We sat down, and for a few days, we just searched and talked and watched documentary movies about Boko Haram and others. We talked with soldiers who came back from captivity after being in captivity as soldiers, and we looked for any possible information that we had. And I'm telling you from the beginning, we didn't have enough, and we are learning all the time, and we are adjusting all the time, whatever we've learned up to now to do. And there is a apparent need here to learn from what we called experts by experience. So some of the cases we used are cases that of children who were kidnapped for sexual use by people in cases, famous cases were in Austria, in the United States, in other places. So anybody that we could listen to him or collect data about him or look into case studies or medical exams or whatever was collected by us in order to enter this uncharted area. I think that when we talk about them, about those kids, we need to understand the severity of the trauma and the difference of the trauma here. My expertise is child maltreatment, child abuse and neglect. And for many years, we recognized that child abuse and neglect is more severe than other forms of trauma. The consequences of child abuse and neglect is more severe than of trauma caused by a car accident or even by war, because of the issue of betrayal. Because in the cases of child maltreatment, the people who harmed the child are the people who he trusted and were supposed to help him. So the issue of betrayal is very important to understand child abuse and neglect. Here, for the first time, I'm talking about betrayal in different circumstances. It's the betrayal of the country, it's the betrayal of the community, but it's also the betrayal of the parents, even if they didn't do it on purpose, because the kids are coming and saying, look, you told us from the moment we were kids, or the moment we were born, that our home is the safest place, that our parents will always safeguard us, that our community will always save us. And here, everything fell apart. The things happened to them. They were taken from their home. They were taken, even though their parents tried to save them, and nobody from the bigger community or the state of Israel come to save them. So I'm not saying yet that the betrayal here is similar to the betrayal of child abuse and neglect, because they are not the preparators, but it's something we need to focus. And we realize that the issue of betrayal here is much bigger than in regular trauma. Only time will let us know if it is as big as in child abuse and neglect. The second thing that we need to talk about is what, and I don't like the word syndrome, because the Stockholm syndrome says something like it's the fault of the child or the person who is in captivity. I'm talking about adaptation response and about the fact that the different kids who came back, we know today, acted differently. And some of them became friends of their captures, of the terrorists. And some of them who became friends of the terrorists who took them were treated better than those who resisted the terrorists. So sitting here in Jerusalem right now and talking about a Stockholm syndrome, I would probably talk about an adaptation response and about the fact that we need to feel, like in child abuse and neglect, we need to realize that it's not always fight or flight. It's not that you expect the children to fight against it or to run away. Sometimes adaptation is the best possible way to deal with the trauma and to minimize the pain and the effect of the trauma, and we need to talk about it. The third one is the negative self-attributions. And again, so the children say, why was I saved? Why was my father killed? Why was I released and my father stayed in captivity? And this negative self-attribution is something we need to deal with. And the last one, which we knew we will need to deal with, is the survivor's trauma. The fact that we survived and others didn't, and what does it mean to our trauma? And those are four major issues we need to deal with when we talk about child hostages. Then was the issue of identifying the necessary partners to include in this guideline. We were asked by the Ministry of Social Services to develop the guidelines on how to work with the kidnapped children when they will come back. Some of them are natural partners, like the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, the Ministry of Education, or the Ministry of Health. But from the first day when I was approached, I told them I'm not getting into it if you won't let me or give me access to the Shin Bet, to the Shabak investigators, the people who would meet the kids, will be the first one to see them in Egypt when they will cross the border crossing to Egypt. Because if they will ask a question in the wrong way, or if they will react in the wrong way to something that children would ask, that could have severe implications to the children's ability to recover. And this is in our hands, not as compared to the way the terrorists would interact with the children while they're in captivity. So 2 weeks before the first child came back, before there was even an agreement, we have done a half-day training for all the Shin Bet workers who were supposed to work with the kids. Since we knew that most of the terrorists are men, we made sure that all of those who would meet the kids will be women and not men, so they won't be associated with them. We made sure that the Shin Bet operator, the woman who would meet the children, or the soldier who would meet the children, would not answer his questions about the fate of his family. And he would tell them, I don't know, I'm responsible to take you there. Bad news, traumatic news needs to be delivered to children by the appropriate persons, be it family members or professional, and not in a Shin Bet or a soldier who is dealing it. And the last thing is that some of those kids had crucial, life-saving intel that we wanted the state of Israel to get from them about the other people in captivity and so on. But we didn't want the Shin Bet investigator to do it with them alone. So we took a group of child investigators. In Israel, if you are a victim of child abuse and neglect, you are not investigated by a police officer. You are investigated by a special child investigator who is a social worker. And they sat together with the Shin Bet people or the intelligence people, and they interviewed the kids together for using the techniques that are the techniques that should be used with children. And all of this training happened 2 weeks before the first child came back, and one of the things that I'm happy. And then working with social workers. One of the things, and you could see it in this picture, that became a big issue for the children who are coming back were sunglasses. those children were kept in dark places, and then they were taken out to the sun. Some of them reported, and we know it from people who came from captivity, war prisoners and others, that they had headaches because of the sun. So we made sure that every child who came back will get a set of sunglasses and will get a set of crayons or other toys that are appropriate for his age. We knew the age of the children, and each one of them had a special package waiting for him. And then you could see it also on the airplanes that flew them. We put something against noises. We didn't want the kids to hear the noise of the planes when they are flying. And we made everything as colorful, as friendly as possible. And I'm very happy that at least the Israeli Defense Forces and the Shin Bet cooperated with us on those issues. We talked about the training, and I want to talk about it again, but this is a very innovative model where the intelligence investigator and the child investigator are sitting together, and the child investigator is the one who is asking the question in a manner that is appropriate for the child. And if the intelligence investigator needs more information, then he's basically asking the child investigator, ask him about this or ask him about that, and get me the additional information. We had a meeting with all the families of the children who were in captivities at the house of the president, also preparing the families. And you basically had to reassure the grandparents or the parents or the siblings or whoever was waiting for the child in captivity that if, I would say it in other words, they cannot do wrong. Because some people told them, beware, don't say that, don't say that. If you say that, that would be worse than saying the other ways. And we had to reassure them that as long as they will respect the children and will keep their autonomy and go with the children, then they cannot really do wrong, and they need to be prepared for that, and so on. And then also the constant adaptation. In the 7 days or 8 days of when the children came back, the model was adapted. In the first days, those who followed it closely might remember that at the first instant in the army base, nobody from the family was there. And we realized immediately that that was a major mistake. And from the second days, the families were the first one to wait for them, together with the soldier. So adaptation was done. In the first day, one of the hospital didn't follow the guidelines with the children, and then we fixed it. So not all of it was followed. Eventually, at the end, it's a free country, and the families can do whatever they want, even if we don't agree with some of the things. Don't agree is too harsh. Even if we don't recommend some of the things that they are doing. And the other example is the medical examinations. At the beginning, we wanted to examine, or the state of Israel wanted to do the medical examination immediately when the child came. Then we said, no, it could wait a day or two. And I can tell you that some of the kids, two of the kids didn't even go for medical examination. In the last time that the two Bedouin kids came back, the family of Aisha, the Bedouin girl who came back with her brother, insisted that some medical tests won't be done because some things, for various reasons, they preferred not to know. And we need to respect that also. So we constantly adapted the things. What did we learn since they came back? We're just finishing a report now of 1 month after they came back. First of all, we learned that the condition in captivity varied dramatically between the children. Some of them were alone, totally alone for days. Others with some family members or other hostages. The children underwent various forms of abuse. All of them suffered emotional abuse, medical neglect, inadequate nutrition, physical abuse, and some of them unfortunately went also for sexual abuse, including some of the children. The other thing that we learned is that what helped them in captivity, and what they are telling that helped them in captivity, and there is a long way for us to understand it. But first of all, it's the role of significant others. If they had somebody they knew or somebody with them that helped them, that gave them some of their food, that reassured them, that slept with them, that was a tremendous help for those kids. The second is the personal resilience. Different different children, different persons have different levels of resilience, and that was a major factor in the child hostages as well. I'm quoting Avichai Brotets from that his wife and 3 kids came back from captivity, and he said, and we are using it in any presentation, he said, yesterday evening, the social worker called me. She told me, listen, Avichai, there are studies on people who have returned from captivities, and there may be all sorts of things that they will avoid. Maybe they won't want to take a shower. Maybe they will have a hard time with other people, and maybe they will avoid contact. Suddenly, in one moment, I understood we have another stage, very long one, and I don't know what it will be like. Maybe they will come back different. Maybe I will receive a different family. So I think he didn't receive a different family, but I think the struggle and the recovery only started now. Second group, very shortly, because I'm running out of time, children who witness severe violence. So Israel changed the law. One of the laws that was changed most rapidly is about the investigation process. In order to have a criminal case against some of the terrorists that were captured and brought into jail in Israel, we changed the law. And child investigators are now legally investigating children up to the age of 15 who were exposed to the massacre. In the past, child investigators were allowed to investigate children only in cases of child abuse and neglect or domestic violence, and not in cases of terror attacks or things like it. This was changed. We have social workers in various contexts and that we need to work with, and we need to train them how to work with it. The educational system is a major issue. How is the educational system working with children who witnessed massacre or children who came back? And the parents is another issue, and all of it is under those guidelines that we developed. Then we are talking about children who lost both their parents. And some of those families were known to the social services before the massacre of October 7th. Many of those families were in the divorce cases or separated parents. We are having now problems, and some of us refer to it as the Italian family case. We have cases where both parents were lost, and the 2 extended families are arguing who will raise the children who survived. Fortunately enough, in most of the cases, we are being able to deal with it without getting into first fights, but not in all of them. And in some of them, parents who were in total, were in no contact with the children, apparently came back to the story and are demanding, the right to see their kids because the other parents was murdered, or cases like it, and this is a major issue that we are dealing with also. I talked about children who lost one parent and or a sibling, again, developing guidelines for the care and treatment. And again, think about a child that he has 2 parents, but one of them is living abroad and he hasn't seen him for 3 years. And the only parent that raised him was murdered. And we have those cases also. And then the parent who lived abroad come back and says, I want the child to live with me, but he never lived with him. He doesn't even know him in some cases, and he wants to stay with the family he knows in Israel. So those are severe issues that we are dealing with there. I think this one I talked about a bit. Children whose friends and peers were kidnapped or killed. And I think that the government, the state of Israel, even the professional field at the beginning didn't pay enough attention to those kids. Here, the good example is the rebellion of the 12th graders in Regional Council of Eshkol. The professional decided that they would go to 5 different schools, and they basically told their parents and the professionals, forget about it. If we are not going together to one school, we are not going to school at all. The only thing we have left now is our friends, and we want to finish school together after 11 years of being together. And eventually they won. And the Regional Council of Eshkol opened a boarding school that operates 4 days a week, and then every Thursday they go back to their families for a long weekend. But this is something we overlooked and we didn't pay enough attention to. And then something that really worries me today more and more, the more we get into it, it's the issue of children who were evacuated for their homes. I can tell you that what's happening today in the hotels, where there's about 160,000 Israelis who were evacuated from their home, which means there is about 40 to 50,000 kids who were evacuated out of their home. It's unbelievable. There are cases of children who are getting into risk behaviors. There are cases of children who are abused. There are cases of pedophiles who are coming to those places, and it's not a place to raise a child. You could not live in a hotel room. And I'll give you one example, and then I'll go to the last two slides of mine. We have a family from Kiryat Shmona who the parents were in severe divorce fight. They didn't finalize the divorce, but they were known to the social services. Since they didn't legally divorce, they were put in one hotel room, the father and the mother together. And it took almost 10 days to get them another room because the hotel was full. So think about those issues, and is the hotel a place that to raise children? We are trying to do our best to talk with parents and professionals to try and safeguard the children who are living there. We've developed short videos for parents. We are training employees of the hotels and employees of the community security authorities and teachers and local workers. But here the state of Israel has done a very lousy job. And we didn't even manage to send the people from the same locality to the same hotels or even to the same city. So in one hotel in Tel Aviv, you'll find people from Kiryat Shmona and Sderot and a kibbutz in the south. And in another hotel in Jerusalem, you'll find other people from Sderot. So even the ability to work with them together and to try and use the existing community services is really harmed. I was asked to say a few words in the last 2 minutes I have about the Paul Baerwald School of Social Work and Social Welfare and about the school during the year. We are the only school who started in November the studies. We started our field work in November. So our experience is now almost 2 months of studies, at least partial studies and full studies for the last 3 weeks. All our programs are back with more than 1,000 students in attendance. Bear in mind that 20% of our students is from the Arab society. We have a big group of students from East Jerusalem. The field placement, as I said, started already in November. We were the first to do it in Israel, and all the schools followed us later. And I am happy to report that up to now, we are proceeding as usual. We didn't have any unusual disturbance. Tensions are high. I went personally into all the classes and reminded everybody that everybody's nerves are exposed those days, and reminded everybody that in the October 7 massacre, also Israeli Arabs were murdered, and also 2 East Jerusalem's citizens were murdered. 2 bus drivers were there by coincidence. So it's not only a Jewish issue. Tensions are high. Up to now, we are able to have a full and good academic atmosphere, and I could only hope that it continue. And I will end in the future. In my last slide, we are in the midst of a campaign to establish in our school, in conjunction between the Haruv Institute and our school, a National Center for Innovation in Children Resilience and Mental Health in Israel. I can admit that the initial proposal was written in August before the October 7 massacre, because our school faculty has a very strong group of people who are experts on mental health and children resilience. And we are trying to develop what we call it academic activism, where students and teachers and field instructors and professionals think together out of the box. Don't do another academic research, because this is done enough and we know how to do it and we know how to raise money to do it. And the second is a true field component of training. The university as a university doesn't know how to work with field workers and train them on the long term. And here the partnership with the Haruv is something that we are trying to do together. And as I said before, the fundraising campaign was launched. We are 20% of the way. We raised about $2 million. And as I said, we are 20% from where we want to be at the end in establishing this center. And I think I finished just on time. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to take on from Asher. So first of all, Asher, thank you very much. I think we are on agreement on many of the issues. I will use my experience as a therapist and specifically on from October 7th to probably highlight some of your ideas and knowledge. So first of all, in a way, perhaps my career has prepared me for this event because I've been treating adults who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse, specifically incest. And I think that a lot of what we know about complex trauma, CPTSD, is relevant to October 7th, partly because of the betrayal issue that I would deal with later. Miriam, could you please go to the next slide? Besides being a professor at the Hebrew University and a psychoanalyst, I am heading one of the organizations, the civilian organizations in Israel, First Line Med. We actually existed before October 7th because we were part of the protest and fighting for democracy. And we are basically the only professional organization that took part in the protest. And our mission was to treat civilians and police officers, by the way, who were wounded at the demonstrations. The organization is made up of physicians from all various fields and mental health professionals. On October 7th, I think probably around 8:30 a.m., just basically about an hour and a half after the missiles reached Tel Aviv and stuff, we had a meeting over the phone, and I have to say, we immediately understood that something very big was going on, and we sort of recruited the organization to what was going on in the Otef. So our physicians had phone calls with people who were locked in the shelters in the various kibbutzim and gave them instruction how to put bandages on and how to release them so they won't be, and how to, whatever, medical information. We helped Madha with the evacuation of people who were wounded because Madha basically couldn't, they sort of collapsed. And some of our physicians took the medical equipment and went down to the south. I was asked, I think it was probably 2 p.m., I was asked to support a father whose son was in a bicycle riding group, professional group, and he was near Baerwald, and they lost contact with him. And actually, the father thought that he was murdered because at 9 o'clock, when they called his iPhone, his cell phone, Hamas was answering the phone. And he told me, look, I'm going down to the south. Please go and see his wife and 2 small children. They live about an hour and a half away from me. So Saturday evening, I went down to where they live, and I was with them for the next, well, until now, but basically for the next 2 weeks. By October 8th, the next morning, on Sunday, we sort of by then had an idea about the magnitude of the event. So I recruited basically all the psychoanalysts of the 5 biggest psychoanalytic institutes in Israel. Israel is really a psychoanalytic empire, and I had a reason why I recruited psychoanalysts. I will talk about it later. And I told them, and I have to say that within an hour or 2, I had 500 psychoanalysts who were volunteering within the organization. So we had 1,400 physicians and about 500 psychoanalysts. And I gave them the following instructions. I told them, 1, you're all going to volunteer. If you're coming to help, no money is going to be involved. second and most important, you have to promise me that once you get someone you need to support or you're going to treat him, you're going to be there for as long as it takes. These people will not change hands. We're not going to transfer them to another service because they've been through enough. And another thing that I told them, that if at any point someone is going to pay for the treatment, they have to promise me that they will not charge 1 shekel more than the amount that will be paid by the state or by us, because the people who have been through this hell are going to get everything for free, with zero bureaucracy and no forms, nothing. And I will tell you later how we have conducted that. Our missions were to support and treat the survivors of the massacre, to support and treat the bereaved families, the families of the hostages, and the hostages once they will be back. Because, and I have to say that the state has failed completely, and it took them quite a while to be back into the picture. So actually the only organizations who functioned during the first days or weeks were actually the organizations who were part of the protest. And I was part of the headquarters of the search of the people who searched for what we call the Hamal, of the kidnapped, the murdered, the slaughtered, whatever. And FLM we took upon ourselves to support the volunteers who were searching for the people, because they were really in shock from the pictures that they saw. And so because of that, once the form of the families of the kidnapped people was formed, within I think it took about a week for the form to be formed, they asked me to join and to be their mental health expert. And so I also work with them. And basically what has been going on through ever since then is that we support and treat basically, I think, almost all of the families of the kidnapped people. And ever since the hostages are back, the Social Security of Israel refers most of the people who have been back from captivity to us. And so we are treating many of the children and many of the adults. And of course, and what we have declared, and we stand up to it, is that everyone who has been affected directly or indirectly from the October 7th events, who will turn to us for help, will receive it immediately. I have to say that it has been 3.5 months. It takes us about 3 minutes from the moment that I post a request that I need a therapist wherever I need it, for a 10-year-old child or for an 85-year-old woman. Within 3 minutes, I have enough volunteers that I can give, that I can refer everyone who needs help to a psychoanalyst who will take him for as long as it takes. Could we go to the next slide, please? What we are advocating is first and foremost the need for long-term, and I believe in analytic therapy for the reasons I will give later, for those who were affected by October 7th atrocities. Based on our expertise in treating survivors of complex trauma, most of us who deal with trauma know that what is needed is, for most of them, long-term therapy, not all of them, preferably with an expert who understands the various manifestations of trauma. And I want to say something about trauma, and this is my how can I say that, my academic debate with the CBT people and all the other people of models. Trauma and what is traumatic about the event is never registered in the conscious level of the mind. Whatever a survivor can tell us or can clearly articulate is not what is most traumatic about his experience. The trauma is always registered at the unconscious level. And for these reasons, the manifestations of the trauma will be manifestations that are not articulated in words. There will be, like, for example, somatic symptoms, unexplained anxiety that the person cannot really say, why is this the trigger for his panic attack? And mostly it will be imprinted in the person's object relations, meaning in the way he behaves or establishes his relationships with significant others and with the therapist. For these reasons and others, and we don't have enough time, psychoanalytically speaking, the most important and informative knowledge and understanding of the traumatic impact stems out of the relationship of the patient with the therapist, what we call transference and counter-transference. And I have to say that we've seen that from the hostages who are back. They, all of them have, almost all of them, not the youngest, but most of them have been interviewed by the media. They know, they can tell you what they've been through, and this is not what is traumatic about the experience. Let's go to the other slide, please. One of the most important and difficult, painful aspects of man-made trauma is the individual's and the community's sense of betrayal. The betrayal can go to at least two directions. One betrayal is because something that should have not happened did happen. Like Asher said, the state promised the people at the Otef that they are saved. The IDF is the strongest army in the world. You don't have anything to be worried about. It didn't happen. This is not what happened. And the other way you can be betrayed is that something that should have happened did not happen. Like the example again, the IDF should have been there and it didn't come. Hence, a survivor's relationship with authority figures should be attended to very carefully and with the full or the fullest attention of the professional staff. I have to say that I think that this is some of the mishaps that happened when the authorities, the way the authorities are dealing with the survivors and with the hostages who are back. Building the survivors' trust is one of the most important tasks of the therapist, and one of the toughest as well. And again, it will be manifested in various, sometimes very subtle ways that are not easy to notice, but if you know about trauma, you will probably know how to see it. October 7th was one of Israeli biggest and most horrific failures. And the fact that it followed 10 months of political struggle made it worse. I do think that sometimes, people want to stay out of politics. It's not, for me, it's not possible. The political is personal. And as a social worker, I do consider myself to be a social activist. And we do have to take into account that most of the people who were directly impacted by the atrocities belong to a certain side of the political map. The kibbutzim are not the biggest fans of this government, and they were called traitors just moments before the attack, metaphorically speaking, moments before. And I think that what we are going to see in the future is probably like the strongest wave of rage that that Israel has ever witnessed. The next slide, please. What do we believe in? I do want to say, I wish I could say that I trust the public services as much as Asher does, but I don't. I have to say I don't trust them as much. I do think that often there are very good intentions, but not necessarily the expertise to treat complex trauma. And first of all, we believe that survivors and people in general should be allowed to choose where and by whom they want to be treated, which is extremely difficult when you go to a public agency, but whoever wants to be treated by the public agency, we are happy for him. FLM is working with the authorities, complementing whatever the state is unable to provide. So, for example, the state actually finances long-term treatment only for first-degree families of those who were murdered and those who were kidnapped. But, for example, all the survivors of the Nova, which have witnessed the most horrific sites and have been through the most horrific experience you can imagine, are not entitled to be treated more. They're entitled to basically 24 sessions, and that's it. And that will not be enough for most of them. The survivors should not pay for anything. They've been through enough. So we are giving everything for free. I have to tell you that on October 6th, none of us had any free hours to give. We were all fully booked ever since the corona. But on October 8th, surprise, surprise, we found some hours. Of course, there are hours that do not exist in our week. For example, I've had to work on Saturdays ever since October 7th. And all given help should be made accessible to the survivors with zero bureaucracy. Could you go to the next slide, and I will try to quicken up. So we have divided our work with the survivors into two phases. The first phase is support. People whose family members are still held in Gaza are not really able to use treatment yet. They can use and they need professional support, but it's not therapy. Still, I prefer that they will be supported by experts, because I think basically we have enough experience, for example, to know when is their reactions, when is it that their reactions require a psychiatrist to pay a home visit, and when is it normal and should be just, they should be allowed to express it. So in addition to the psychoanalyst, we have about 140 psychiatrists and family physicians who have been trained in the treatment of acute trauma, who do house calls for all the survivors who need that, or have 3 hours in their private practice. The second phase is treatment, and this is meant only for people who are able and declare that they wish to go into long-term analytic treatment. We have now, I think, 200 or more long-term therapies. Just to the next slide, please. Okay, I do want to say something about the people who are back from Gaza. Like I said, I've been sitting with some of the hospital staff before the hostages were back, and I have to say that we've also given them our recommendation, which are very similar to what Haruv has given them. They have promised to behave, to behave according to these recommendations, and many of them failed, in at least the way I see it. So we have some conclusions based on our experience with the hostages, and I think it will be crucial to the next hostages, if any of them are going to be back, because they are going to be probably wounded and very, very traumatic. Staff should be strictly minimized. The people, even though the hospitals have promised that, the hostages who were back had to meet dozens of people, mostly unneeded. Media should be out of the hospital, completely out. The staff should not be allowed to speak with the media. I have to tell you that in some cases, at least in one case, a physician from one of the hospitals came out and gave so many details about what the hostage has given her, that the family of the hostage called frantically. She called the phone and said, look, these details are endangering the people who are still in Gaza, and we had to call the Ynet site and tell them, you have to take it off immediately because it endangers the hostages. And basically all of the hospitals have blubbered themselves to death. I mean, they were horrible the way I see it. And also I want to say that people who know nothing or who know too little about complex trauma should be kept away. I do want to say something, just one more thing about complex trauma. Complex trauma is a field in its own right. So the hostages have been through complex trauma. There's no doubt about it. I think that even the people who were locked in the shelters and have witnessed the massacre, in a way, should be treated as complex PTSD because of the betrayal, because the state wasn't there, because the IDF failed to protect them. And this makes it, they are more prone to develop CPTSD and not PTSD. But I also have to tell you that from my experience, and I'm still treating at least 3 of the, one 19.5-year-old girl who has lost all of her family. No one is left. They were all murdered. A family whose daughter is still in Gaza, and a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old hostage who is back from Gaza. None of them, and a soldier, by the way, who was wounded at October 7th. Beside the soldier, none of them has PTSD. And I don't think they will develop PTSD. It doesn't mean that they do not need long-term therapy, but PTSD is not the toughest thing to treat. There are things which are tougher. I'm going to be quiet now and see if there are any questions and let the audience say something.
It's kind of hard to speak after this, I have to admit. And I think that your presentations were both absolutely outstanding and touched our hearts and our minds. So thank you. I have a question here from Daphna Enzer. And it's a question that I think a lot of us were thinking as both of you were speaking. How are you able to cope with these topics day after day? Especially when you're looking into the horrific cases of the previously kidnapped children. Can you offer us some insights?
I'm not a clinician, but I will tell you one thing that I wanted to say beyond that, and it's about hope. I think, and we need to remember it, most of the people who go through trauma, be them kids or adults, if they are treated right, don't develop post-traumatic stress symptoms. I think that if the civil society in Israel and the services and the professionals and the social workers and whoever will do their work in the right way, we will be able to overcome most of the traumatic events and most of people will survive. I will tell you a very short story on a very interesting thing that happened to us. When we started working about the children who were hostages, we were approached by a person that apparently was kidnapped when he was 17 years old by terrorists in Jordan, in one of the airplanes that were kidnapped to Jordan. And he was separated from his mother. His mother was freed and he was kept hostage together with other people for 3 weeks under bombarding, and nobody knew where he is. And after 3 weeks, King Hussein in Black September rescued the hostages. He was then American. He was sent back to the United States. And a year later, he made Aliyah. He's 70 years old now. He was 17 when that happened in 1970. He's 70 years old now. He has kids and grandkids. He's a director general of a high-tech startup company, very successful. And next week, he's meeting all the parents of the kidnapped children to tell them his story and to show them that there is hope, that with the right treatment and all the work that Ofrit and other clinicians are doing, we are optimistic. And I think that's also what gives us the strength when we are hearing those horrific and unbelievable stories about children and other. We think that if we do our work in the right way, we will do good. And I think that's the most important thing.
And I want to add something else about, well, I don't even know if I'm optimistic or realistic. I don't know. It's and it's also because I know that there's a big difference between what people tell the media and what people tell us at the privacy and intimacy of our clinics. So when this girl, and I tell you, like, she was locked in the shelter in one of the kibbutzim for 36 hours with her boyfriend and her parents and 3 siblings, and you don't have to worry, I'm changing the details so it can be identified. It's her parents and her 3 siblings were locked in another shelter, and they texted throughout the day. And at 11:59, and that hour is inscribed into everyone who has ever heard her story, her brother called, and so she answered the phone, and she heard some noises, which she then understood were bangings on the door, and some like tuk tuk tuk, which were obviously the shooting. And then she heard screaming, and then there was the silence, and they were all dead. They were all murdered. And she told me something that I think that therapists should, they have a lot to learn from her. I was at the funeral of her family, 5 people, plus another uncle who was murdered at that Saturday. It was a horrible funeral, by the way. And she then told me when she came to the next session that people came over to her and they said, you know, you have to go to therapy because you need help to digest what has happened. And she said, and then she looked up and she said, I don't want to digest what happened. And I understand what she's saying, because digesting or processing the trauma so soon means that what happened was not so horrible. It is bearable. You can think about it, and that's something that she cannot agree to. She does not want people to tell her that she needs to go back into normal life, because there is no normal life. Her family is gone. She's all alone in the world, and her kibbutz is burned to the ground. And she needs us to bear, to have the strength to not hurry her up, not to tell her you need to quickly organize yourself. You don't need to be strong, because we are not strong enough to stand by your side for however long it takes. And once she asked me, do you think I'm ever going to be happy again? And I said, based on what I know you just for a month and a half or so, that was some time ago. I said, yes, I do think you're going to be happy again. I think that one day, not that you're going to be happy again, you will experience happiness in your life. But I told her it will never cease to hurt, never. To the day, for the last moment of your life, you're going to be in a lot of pain. So I think we shouldn't hush those people to overcome and be heroes and be strong. They've been through the unimaginable. So,
Thank you. Thank you. If the two of you have a few more minutes, we have a lot more questions, but I will try to combine them as best I can. People are asking about parallels to the Holocaust, and if there is any way of using the testimonies and our experience in treating trauma from Holocaust survivors to help us understand how to approach the traumas of the victims of October 7th and beyond.
Asher,
The short answer is yes.
Yeah.
The short and the whole answer is yes. Any experience we have in treating any trauma is used for this. This is a different type of, not type, it's an unprecedented case. Any knowledge we have about trauma, about witnessing trauma, should be used. The Holocaust, unfortunately, is one of the major ones. And the Holocaust was studied, and there is lots of empirical work on it, including children who were in the Holocaust as children.
Yeah, I agree with Asher. I just want to add 2 things. One is one of the things that is very, very hurtful to Israelis. I don't necessarily hear it from the survivors, but from other people, is the fact that the world does not stand by our side. This is one of the things that throws people directly to the Holocaust. And of course, the cruelty and the sadism that was that they have witnessed. That is, but then again, we do have a state, we do have an army, and we are not. Our existence is not in danger. So there is a big difference. But
thank you, thank you. One last question that I received a few times from Michael Schwartz and Judith Tellerman is asking to please describe what is tougher than PTSD.
What is tougher than PTSD is basically a syndrome or a disorder. It's that is one part of it is depression and other part is anxiety. The only difference between PTSD and anxiety and depression, which usually go together, by the way, is the fact that the person has a recollection of an event that has endangered, or he thought that it endangered his physical existence or well-being. CPTSD is a trauma that takes place within a relationship of dependence. The fact that a person is dependent on another one makes the impact much, much tougher. And the effects is very much in terms of relationship. And this is also what takes, it cannot be treated by medication. For example, you can treat depression and anxiety with medication. It should never be without therapy, but it can help. CPTSD is basically about relationship, about trust, and about authority. Now, just think about a hostage. Let me give you a short example. The hostage that I'm treating is now back in hospital. She came back from captivity quite badly wounded. So she's back in hospital and she's going to stay there for the next 6 months. So once she was transferred, she finished her operation and she was transferred to Shikum rehabilitation. She wanted to go out for the weekend, to go back home, and she's allowed to. And so the nurses said, well, we have to ask the how do you say menahel of the machlaka? The
head of the department.
The head of the department.
The head of the department. And so at one moment, like someone showed up, he peeped into the room and said, you're not going out. And he said, but why? He said, because I'm saying so. I'm the head of the department and you're not going out. And she said, and then she tried to explain. She said, you know, I was locked up for almost 60 days alone in a hospital room in Gaza. I absolutely need to go out. He said, you're not going out. So, of course, here we have a problem with the head of the department, but there need to be, they need to have guidance and supervision for, if you know enough about CPTSD, you know that this is no way to treat anyone, but definitely it's not the right way to treat someone who's back from captivity. And even though she cried her eyes out, he said, no, you're not going out. So they had to reach the head of the hospital, and he said, of course you're going out. But she's traumatized now. Or you have to explain to the nurse that when she comes to take out blood, she needs to explain to the hostage, well, she's not a hostage anymore, she's an ex-hostage, that you need to explain to her exactly what you're going to do. You have to present yourself by your full name, and then you have to say, now I'm going to pull your sleeve, and now I'm going to take, because what they've been through is exactly the opposite. So what can I say about the guidance that they've received? Not too good.
Well, they received the guidance. Stupid people exist everywhere. And
Yeah.
this head of department is a stupid physician. And
Yeah.
it's all about the way to deal with trauma is all about regaining your autonomy.
Right.
You need to understand that people who were hostages, people who were traumatized, the trauma is about losing their autonomy over their life. And the first thing you need to do is to let them regain autonomy and control over their life. You don't hug them if they don't want, you don't take their blood if they don't want, and you don't tell them what to do. Even if you don't like it, even if they are doing things that you think that are stupid,
Right.
You need to understand that you need to let them regain control. And I think Ofrit answered better than me what's worse than PTSD. But this issue of autonomy is a major one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's hard for me to wrap this up, but I am going to wrap this up. And I want to thank our two panelists tonight very much for opening their hearts and their minds to us this evening, and for sharing these insights. We hope that you out there will consider helping us in the We Are One emergency campaign. You can find the link in the chat box. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Our next webinar will be on January 30th with Professor Moshe Halbertal, who will be speaking on the meaning of Holocaust Remembrance Day, facing evil yesterday and today. And I think that we can all understand the evil that we're facing today, definitely. Again, thank you all for participating in this webinar, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
much. Thank you.